The crystalline spires of our last sanctuary trembled as another barrage from the Cthar war fleet pounded the planetary shields. I watched through the observation dome as fracture lines spread across our once beautiful crystal cities, now reduced to glittering rubble under a sky polluted with the ash of war. The brilliant azure atmosphere that had been the pride of Xylar for millennia now swirled with toxic clouds, punctuated by flashes of destructive energy from above. My name is Alara, lore keeper of the Xylar Consortium, and I was recording what I believed would be the final moments of our civilization. The Eastern Shield generators have failed, Commander Forlag announced, his crystalline form shifting to a deeper blue, our species' physical manifestation of dread. We have perhaps 3 planetary rotations before total shield collapse. Around the circular chamber carved deep within our dying mother planet, the remaining 12 members of the Xylar High Council exchanged resonant tones of despair. Once we had been a council of 100, representing all facets of our crystal-based civilization. Now, we were merely the last survivors, huddled in our final refuge. Our countermeasures? Asked Thelia's, our chief resonator, her voice barely a harmonic whisper. Forlag's facets darkened further. Depleted, our final squadron of harmonic disruptors was obliterated attempting to disable their flagship. The Cthar have adapted to all our defensive frequencies. I listened, detached, yet recording every word, as was my duty. For 10,000 cycles, the lore keepers had documented the rise of Xylar civilization. Our achievements in crystalline architecture, our harmonic technologies that had brought prosperity to our world, our peaceful expansion to nearby moons. Now, it seemed my final duty would be to record our extinction. The Cthar had appeared at the edges of our system less than a cycle ago, a biomechanical empire of ruthless efficiency. Where we Xylar were beings of ordered crystal and harmony, they were a twisted fusion of organic and mechanical parts, driven by an insatiable hunger for resources and a hatred of all other forms of intelligence. Their ships resembled massive insects, bristling with biological weapons and mechanical horrors. Their very presence disrupted our harmonic fields, causing pain to any Xylar in proximity. There must be something we haven't tried, pleaded Nerix, the youngest council member, his crystalline form still showing traces of hopeful green. Some weapon, some strategy. Every conventional option has been exhausted, Forlag replied grimly. Our harmonics cannot penetrate their bioshields. Our crystal technology is systematically being corrupted by their technoviruses. They've studied us, anticipated us. Each defense we mount is countered before it's fully deployed. The chamber fell silent, the only sound the distant rumble of bombardment above. Perhaps, I said, speaking for the first time, we should consider unconventional options. All crystal faces turned toward me. As lore keeper, I rarely contributed to military discussions. My domain was history, knowledge, the preservation of our culture, not its defense. What do you suggest, Alara? Forlag asked, a hint of skepticism in his harmonic. I've been studying our most ancient texts, I said carefully. Texts so old they predate the formation of the consortium, texts kept sealed in the forbidden archives. Murmurs of concern rippled through the chamber. The forbidden archives contain knowledge deemed too dangerous for general access. Failed experiments, catastrophic mistakes, records of contact with entities that had proven harmful to Xylar sanity. By whose authority did you access those archives? Demanded Cyrex, our lawkeeper, his tone sharp with accusation. By the authority of imminent extinction, I replied, matching his tone. Would you prefer I had left potentially saving knowledge locked away as we face oblivion? Forlag raised a crystalline appendage, silencing the brewing argument. Continue, lore keeper. What have you found? I activated my personal harmonic projector, and ancient symbols filled the air above us. Characters so old that even I, with all my training, struggled to interpret them fully. These are fragments of accounts from the Dawn era, before Xylar civilization fully crystallized. They speak of an ancient species that once dominated this sector of the galaxy, a species so powerful and terrifying that multiple elder empires, including the ancestral forms of the Cthar, united to either contain them or erase them from galactic history. I focused the projection on a particular set of symbols. They were called humans. The words seemed to drop into the chamber like a stone into still water, creating ripples of unease. "I've never encountered this term in any historical record," said Thelius, "because they were systematically removed from history." I explained. These texts describe them as destroyers, unpredictable masters of warfare, and most tellingly, the ultimate weapon. They were feared not just for their destructive capacity, but for something more fundamental, something about their very nature that the elder empires found profoundly disturbing. "And why is this relevant to our current crisis?" Forlag asked, though I could sense he already anticipated my answer. "Because," I said, projecting a new set of symbols, "these texts include a summoning ritual, a way to call forth a human from wherever they now exist." Absolute silence filled the chamber, broken only by the distant thunder of destruction. "You can't possibly be suggesting," began Cyrex. "I am suggesting exactly that," I interrupted. "We stand at the edge of annihilation. The Cthar will show no mercy. They have made that abundantly clear. If there exists a force that even they once feared, should we not at least consider it?" "This is madness," Cyrex hissed. "We know nothing about these humans. If multiple empires united to contain them, they must have posed an existential threat. We would be trading one doom for another, potentially worse one." "The text suggests the humans were neutral forces," I countered, "neither benevolent nor malevolent by nature, but immensely powerful and unpredictable. They responded to threats, but did not instigate conflict. How can we trust ancient texts of uncertain origin?" Nerix asked, his tone caught between hope and fear. "We cannot," I admitted. "But what choice do we have? Wait for the Cthar to break through our final shields? Watch as they harvest our crystal cores for their biomechanical abominations?" The debate raged for hours. Forlag, initially skeptical and fearful of the consequences, gradually came to support my proposal. Others remained steadfastly opposed, arguing that a dignified extinction was preferable to unleashing an unknown horror upon the galaxy. In the end, it was another Cthar bombardment collapsing part of our secondary shield and killing 2 council members that decided the matter. Facing certain destruction, even the most hesitant agreed we had no choice. "Where must this ritual be performed?" Forlag asked as we evacuated the damaged council chamber. "In the ancient resonance temple," I replied. "The texts say it must be conducted at a nexus point of crystalline energy." The resonance temple was our oldest structure, built around a natural formation of perfect crystal columns that predated our civilization. Once the center of Xyler spiritual life, it had fallen into disuse as our society became more focused on technological advancement. Now it would be our last hope. The ritual required immense crystalline energy drawn from the heart of our planet itself. It called for desperate prayers and sacrifice, not of lives, but of essence. Each participant would need to contribute a fragment of their core crystal, a piece of their very being. As the 20 of us, the remaining council members, and a few trusted advisors, arranged ourselves in the prescribed pattern around the central crystal column, I felt a profound sense of dread mingled with desperate hope. The ancient text had been clear about one thing. Once summoned, a human could not be controlled or dismissed. Whatever happened next would be entirely up to the entity we called forth. "Begin the harmonic sequence," I instructed, and Thelia struck the central crystal with a resonator rod. A pure note rang out, echoing through the chamber. One by one, we each approached the column and pressed a fragment of our core crystal against it. With each addition, the note grew more complex, developing overtones and harmonics impossible in normal Xyler music. I recited the ancient words, my voice rising and falling with the increasingly chaotic harmonies. The air in the temple began to shimmer, reality itself seeming to bend around the central column. My perception distorted. The temple seemed to stretch and contract, the other council members appearing both impossibly distant and uncomfortably close simultaneously. A sense of vast, alien presence grew within the chamber. The harmonies reached a crescendo that threatened to shatter my crystalline form. And then, silence. Complete, absolute silence. A rift opened in the air before us, a vertical tear in reality itself. From within that impossible gap stepped a figure. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. Roughly bipedal like some species we had encountered, but with a strange, fleshy exterior rather than crystal, mechanical components, or the chitinous shells of the Cthar. It stood on two lower appendages, with two upper limbs hanging at its sides. Its head was round, with a flat face dominated by two forward-facing optical organs. But it was the eyes that truly disturbed me, deep, dark, and somehow ancient, containing either an absolute void or an entire chaotic universe. I couldn't tell which would be more terrifying. The human's presence exerted a tangible pressure on us, both physical and spiritual. The crystal structures around us vibrated in response to its mere existence, resonating at frequencies I had never experienced. Forlag was the first to recover from the shock. He stepped forward, his crystalline form shifting to display diplomatic patterns. Great being, he began, his harmonic tones carefully modulated to convey respect without subservience. We, the Xyler, have summoned you in our hour of greatest need. Our civilization faces extinction at the hands of a merciless enemy, the Cthar. We humbly request your assistance. The human did not respond. It simply observed us with those unfathomable eyes, head tilting slightly, as if we were curious specimens in a laboratory. Its gaze swept over our crystalline forms, the ancient temple, lingering momentarily on the still glowing central column. "Can you understand us?" I asked, stepping forward to join Forlag. "We are desperate. The Cthar will break through our final defenses soon. They will destroy everything we are." Still no response. The human began to move around the chamber, examining the crystal columns with what appeared to be detached interest. It reached out a limb, a hand, I would later learn to call it, and lightly touched a crystal surface. The crystal rang with a clear, pure tone that none of us had ever produced. "It doesn't understand," Cyrex muttered, "or it doesn't care." This was foolishness. As if in answer to his doubt, a warning tone echoed through the temple. Forlag rushed to a communication crystal. "Cthar scout ships have entered orbit," he reported, his tone tight with fear. They detected the energy surge from the ritual. The human looked up at the ceiling of the temple, as if its vision could penetrate the kilometers of crystal and stone above us to see the approaching threat. Perhaps it could. For several moments, it simply stood there, still and silent, gaze fixed upward. Then, without any visible action or effort on its part, the communication crystal suddenly blazed with light and sound. Cthar distress signals flooding all frequencies. The audio was a cacophony of mechanical shrieks and organic wails. Through the crystal's visual projection, we watched as the 5 Cthar scout ships simply came apart, not in explosions or violent destruction, but in silent, impossible deconstruction. Their matter seemed to untether from itself, dissolving into cosmic dust or twisting into shapes that violated the laws of physics as we understood them. In moments, there was nothing left, no ships, no debris, just empty space where they had been. A brief, stunned silence fell over our group, followed by a wave of crystal chimes, our equivalent of cheers or applause. The human had defended us. It had destroyed our enemies with a mere thought. But my initial relief quickly gave way to deeper terror as I watched the being's expression. There had been no effort, no sense of battle or struggle. It had simply observed a threat and eliminated it with the casual indifference one might show toward brushing away an insect. If it could unmake matter so effortlessly, what else was it capable of? And more importantly, was it truly our ally, or had we merely interested it momentarily? Forelag caught my gaze, and I saw my own fears reflected in the shifting patterns of his crystalline face. We had summoned something beyond our comprehension, and we had absolutely no control over what would happen next. The Cthar primary fleet has halted its approach, reported Nerix, who was monitoring the long-range sensors. They're holding position at the system's edge. This news should have brought relief, but instead, it only deepened my unease. The Cthar never retreated, never showed caution. Their single-minded aggression was what had made them such an overwhelming force. If they were suddenly exercising restraint, it meant they recognized something about our new ally that we didn't. The communication crystal suddenly blazed again, this time with Cthar transmissions directed toward their own forces, not us. Their biomechanical language was largely incomprehensible to us, but certain phrases had been translated during our conflict. Retreat immediately. Primal 1 detected. Ancient nightmare has returned. Extinction protocol. The Cthar knew what a human was. Not just knew, they feared it on a primal level. Meanwhile, the human had begun to move through our underground sanctuary. It walked with an unhurried gait, examining everything it passed with the same detached curiosity. It touched data crystals, peered into resonance chambers, studied the architectural support structures of our last refuge. It made no attempt to communicate, asked no questions about the Cthar or our plans. It simply observed, absorbed, processed. Occasionally, when it touched certain crystals, particularly ancient data storage matrices, I felt a strange resonance in my own core, as if distant memories were being stirred. The human had been with us for several hours when it happened. I was following it through the archive chambers when a sudden wave of foreign images flooded my consciousness. Not my memories, but visions of Xyler's past, crystal cities in their prime, the construction of our first space vessels, diplomatic meetings with neighboring systems. But these were not the beautified historical records I was familiar with. These images showed something darker. Xyler representatives meeting with early Cthar emissaries centuries ago, making territorial concessions to avoid conflict. Our ancestors deliberately ignoring intelligence about Cthar expansion because addressing it would have disrupted lucrative trade arrangements. Our government sacrificing distant colonies to buy temporary peace. I staggered under the weight of these revelations, my crystalline form resonating with shock. The human turned to look at me, and I knew with certainty that it was the source of these visions. It wasn't creating fiction. It was somehow extracting and amplifying hidden truths from our own historical records, truths that had been deliberately obscured or forgotten. "Stop!" I gasped, the harmonic of my voice distorted with distress. "Please." The visions ceased, but the damage was done. I knew now that our current crisis was not simply the result of Cthar aggression, but had roots in our own past failures, cowardice, political expediency, and moral compromise. When I returned to the council chamber, I found chaos. Other council members had experienced similar revelations, and bitter arguments had erupted. Some denied the visions, claiming the human was manipulating us with false images. Others, like Forelag, displayed patterns of deep shame and anger upon learning how our military had been systematically weakened by political decisions over centuries. "This creature is turning us against each other," Cyrex shouted, his crystalline form jagged with agitation. "Don't you see? It's not here to help us. It's here to judge us. It's showing us the truth," Forelag countered, his usually disciplined military bearing now fractured with emotion. "Truths we should have faced long ago." The human stood at the entrance to the chamber, silently watching our discord with that same impassive expression. Was there the faintest hint of satisfaction in those alien eyes? Or was I projecting my own guilt onto its unfathomable countenance? The revelations continued over the following days. The human moved throughout our remaining facilities, and everywhere it went, hidden truths seemed to surface, not through speech or direct communication, but through its mere presence, as if it were a catalyst for truth itself. Most disturbing were the reactions of the Cthar. Their massive fleet remained at the edge of our system, neither advancing nor retreating. Their communication channels were filled with what could only be described as religious terror. References to the judgment and the unveiling peppered their transmissions. They knew something about the human that we still didn't grasp, something that terrified them far more than conventional defeat. On the seventh day after the summoning, the human returned to the ancient resonance temple. All remaining Xylar leaders followed, drawn by an unspoken compulsion. In the temple's central chamber, the human finally confronted us as a group. Still without speaking, it raised its hands, and the air around us transformed. The temple walls became projection surfaces, displaying not just images, but experiential visions of our history. We didn't merely see the past. We felt it, lived it, from multiple perspectives. We experienced the fear of colonists abandoned to Cathar aggression by our central government. We felt the smug satisfaction of politicians who had negotiated temporary peace by sacrificing others. We understood the complicity of military leaders who had downplayed threats to maintain their budgets and prestige. No one was spared this judgment. Even I, as lore keeper, was forced to confront how my predecessors had selectively preserved history, omitting inconvenient truths and maintaining comfortable narratives. The most resistant council members experienced the harshest revelations. Cyrex, who had most vehemently denied our culpability, found himself trapped in a temporal loop of his own corrupt decisions. Forced to relive the moments, he had chosen personal advancement over truth and justice. The human orchestrated this tribunal without aggression or hatred. There were no punishments, no violence, just truth, inescapable and absolute. Power structures collapsed, not because they were attacked, but because they were exposed. No one would follow leaders whose fundamental corruption had been laid bare for all to witness. Forlag, confronted with the military legacy of compromise he had inherited, fell to his knees before the human. "What would you have us do?" he asked, his voice a broken harmonic. "How do we atone?" But the human offered no guidance, no plan for redemption. It simply continued its work of exposure, allowing us to see ourselves clearly for perhaps the first time in centuries. Meanwhile, the Cathar fleet began a full retreat from our system. Not defeated in glorious battle, but fleeing in religious terror from the human's presence and the internal collapse of Xylar leadership. They abandoned outposts, withdrew ground forces, left equipment behind, all in their haste to escape. As our old power structures crumbled, something unexpected began to emerge. Without the corrupt council to direct them, ordinary Xylar citizens, crystal workers, low-ranking soldiers, resonance technicians, began to organize themselves. Not according to any grand plan, but out of simple necessity and the shared understanding that had come from the human's revelations. Forlag, stripped of his formal authority but respected for his willingness to face hard truths, found himself working alongside maintenance crystal shapers to repair crucial infrastructure. I, no longer the keeper of sanitized history, began the painful process of correcting our archives with the unvarnished truth. Through it all, the human watched. It never led, never guided, never instructed. It had simply removed the obstacles, both external enemies and internal corruption, and exposed the truth, leaving us to determine our own path forward. For several more days, the human remained with us, observing our first stumbling steps toward reconstruction. There was a minor incident when a faction of former military officers attempted to seize control of the remaining defense systems, arguing that someone needed to take charge in the crisis. The human's intervention was swift, minimal, and terrifying. It didn't harm the conspirators. It simply appeared among them, and with a gesture, turned their weapons to dust. The would-be leaders experienced a brief mental vision of the consequences of repeating old mistakes, a vision that left them shaking and repentant. It was a final reminder of the lesson we needed to internalize. Then, on the 15th day after its arrival, the human returned to the ancient resonance temple. Somehow, word spread throughout our remaining population, and hundreds gathered to witness whatever would come next. The human stood before the central crystal column, where it had first emerged into our world. It looked at the assembled Xyler, its gaze finally settling on Forelag and me, who stood at the front of the crowd. In that final look was something indefinable, neither emptiness nor judgment, but perhaps a silent question about what we would make of our future. Then, without ceremony or farewell, the human simply dissolved, not into nothingness, but into something like the space between spaces, leaving no trace of its presence except for the profound changes it had catalyzed in our civilization. In the cycles that followed, we Xyler began the slow, difficult process of rebuilding. Freed from the Cthar threat, but burdened with the legacy of our own failings, we constructed a new society not based on the old hierarchies, but on cooperation and truth. The ancient Resonance Temple became central to our new civilization, not as a place of worship for the human, which would have missed the point entirely, but as a place of reflection and truth-telling. The central crystal column, which had served as the gateway for the human's arrival, now resonated with a new harmonic frequency that reminded us of both the terror and the clarity the human had brought. I, Ilera, once lore keeper of a flawed empire, now serve as part of the distributed leadership network that governs what remains of Xyler civilization. My role is no longer to preserve comfortable narratives, but to ensure that all history, glorious and shameful alike, is accessible to every citizen. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I return to the temple and touch the central crystal, feeling its vibrations. I wonder about the human, what it truly was, where it came from, and why ancient empires had feared it enough to try to erase it from history. Was it a destroyer or a revealer? A weapon or a catalyst? Perhaps it was all these things and more. We survived, but we are forever haunted by the memory of what our desperation summoned. A being that showed us not just the face of our enemy, but the truth of ourselves. A being that neither saved us nor condemned us, but simply removed the lies that prevented us from saving ourselves. The future remains uncertain, but for the first time in many cycles, it truly belongs to us, weighted with the responsibility of choice and the memory of the terror we summoned in our darkest hour. As new crystal spires begin to rise from the ruins of our cities, they bear little resemblance to the grandiose structures of old. These are more modest, more functional, designed with cooperation rather than prestige in mind. In their facets, sometimes at certain angles of light, I fancy I can see a reflection, two deep, ancient eyes, watching to see what we will make of our second chance. And I wonder, if we fail again, if we return to old patterns of deception and compromise, will the human return? And if it does, will we survive its judgment a second time? These questions have no answers, but perhaps that uncertainty is itself the final gift the human left us. The knowledge that our choices have consequences, that truth cannot be permanently buried, and that even in the darkest moments of desperation, the greatest danger and the greatest hope may be one and the same.